Today I speak with Tapes from the Future. Tapes has knowledge of the government's use of mind-altering chemicals for social control.
Okay, so datura is a neurotoxin, and like fluoride, which is another very widely used neurotoxin that's intentionally put in the water. I recently put together an article citing scientific sources, but datura does the same thing. What it does is it disrupts the connection between the hippocampus and the forebrain, the frontal cortex, and it allows for impulses felt through the amygdala to kind of go through unfiltered without the forebrain's input of how the body and the mind will respond. And so this drug, this toxin, is very, very powerful, and it can induce what is mind control, physical mind control. It can make someone that vulnerable to suggestion. It can induce memory loss. It can do many number of harmful things to the human mind and body. And I've seen it used as a roofie. I've seen it used to make two people who know each other treat each other like strangers, hurt each other. It messes with everything. It makes you more vulnerable and susceptible to fear, frustration, sadness, sexual urges, impulses. And I don't want to undercut how often it is used by men to people, and to torture people by putting them in situations where they won't be able to control their impulses, their body, and they would, even if they were, not a person that would ever do that, because it's the thing, it allows them to be controlled in a way that doesn't let their mind have input. Because when we think of our mind, it is the forebrain, and the hippocampus is the processing center. So really what they're doing is that drug really just hacks the processing center of the brain.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a drug used by people in power to stay in power. So do you mind going over who is that power and why exactly do they need this to keep their operations going?
Sure. Before I go into them, I do want to focus just a little more on fluoride, just because I want to just give you some numbers to give you an idea of how bad this is.
Yeah, I heard about that. That's why I stopped drinking tap water altogether, man. It was
toothpaste too. Honestly, I updated the article because I've realized, and here, I'll show you. I made my own toothpaste. All it is, it's baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, and some mint. And it works perfectly fine with brushing my teeth with it. I mean, it's better than Arm & Hammer, and Arm & Hammer is mostly baking soda and peroxide anyway. It's the fluoride that's the poison. But what I'm saying is fluoride, so what fluoride does, and just to give you an idea of how similar it is to datura, but also how different it is, what it does is it causes lesions to form on the hippocampus. So instead of opening up the hippocampus to control, it numbs it. It makes you more susceptible to fear, to power. It makes you less likely to question authority. And the level of fluoride in the drinking water alone, for an average adult, 10 to 20 milligrams daily. And for a pharmaceutical, a bad pharmaceutical that's intended to do harm to your mind, that's a lot. That's on top of equal amounts each time you brush your teeth with fluoridated toothpaste. And avoid mouthwash with sorbitol, avoid non-fluoridated commercially sold toothpaste, because they have other chemicals in there that have a similar effect or worse effects. And they're in the ingredient label, but that's the thing. Make sure to look up every single ingredient on there. Sorbitol and fluoride and datura. I mean, they're not going to label datura because they use that more surreptitiously. But I mean, fluoride in the drinking water is being used, like the datura, to keep the people in power in control. And they've worn many, many, many faces over the years. Right now, the current system of government is, they control the U.S. government through an apparatus called the Reich. The Reich they operate through the CIA, but they really the whole government is the Reich. And they have this ancient root in Egypt, which is why you see the Great Pyramid of Giza on the dollar bill. And they've had many, many names over the years, this culture of people. They started off, they came into history, they entered into Egyptian history in the age of Zep Tepi as a culture of people called the Sumerians, Cimmerins. And what they did was they offered the men of Egypt, alchemy, magic, power, in exchange for their daughters. And this is a dominating slave culture force. They are an alien force. When you think of the Greys, that's them. I mean, they can change their form, but I mean, that's their natural form. They've been moving around the world under the guise of different cultures. They were the Chatti in the Celts. So in Germany and in Ireland, they were present. And that's part of what formed the alliance that created the Reich in 1945. I guess really you would call it an interplanetary alliance, but I mean, these were people that were very well established. They've been on Earth for thousands of years. They have children, but they're a colonizing force they're the minority, but they're in control because they have power and they've been using it in every way to keep people from being able to understand the truth in a way that doesn't make it seem like a silly documentary to watch when you're stoned at 2 a.m., right? Because they make it sound silly. They make you question it. But when you look at the history of these people, you see their impact, you see what they've done, and you see a clear line through history from the past to the present. I actually have a really interesting historical discovery I made, and that I'd like to share too, because it has a little bit more to do with the Nazis, the Black Sun. Actually, this is the origin of the organization we know of as the Black Sun, the Nazi organization, that symbol. So let me explain that, because this is a core part of their philosophy. Now, understand that they've co-opted every single world religion to some degree, but to spite the real God, they corrupted the Old Testament, the canonical Hebrew Bible, first and foremost, because the Hebrew name for it it's the Nusach HaMasorah. And I'm going to just send it to you in Discord chat to let you know how it's kind of laid out, because it's important. And Nusach is a separate word. Ham, Mas, and Sora are joined by apostrophes, and they form a separate word. And so the true meaning of that, when you look at the historical context of what those words meant to the people at that time who created that book, it's the Song of Us, because Nusach means song or scripture. Ham means home or us. Mas means male, and Sora means female. And the corruption lays in how the Sumerians decided that they would change the meanings of each individual word to not just change the meaning of the document, but make it seem that it was something that they created as a social control tool rather than as something that was meant to protect people and bring them together in a community. Because what they did was, the word Nusach, it means scripture or song. They made it more aligned with meaning rites or rituals. And ham, they associated with pork, which is the closest meat to the taste, texture, and flavor of human flesh. Long pig is how it's historically referred to in a lot of documents. So they made that corruption there. But there was also another corruption. Also has a meaning associated with darkness, burnt, or black. And one of the most evil things they did, Mas and Sora go together as male and female, brother and sister. What they did is they left the word Sora exactly as it was, but they took the word Mas and they started feeding different meanings into it. Gold, sun, taxmaster, mastery. That's where mastery comes from. And so what they were doing was they were turning the masculine. They were because they offered the men these power over the women, because that was what they were bringing to this world: domination and rape. And so by changing the meaning of Mas to not just mean brother, but to mean master, they changed the meaning of the text, the title of the text, to be translated to the rights of the black sun. That's because Mas is sun, Ham is black. And with sisters still part of the name, the lexical, the syntax means that they're masters over the sisters, domination over the women. So they took this document, this cultural, something of so much importance, and they turned it into propaganda for themselves, for their own. And so when you hear of, conspiracy theories get a little dicey when you start to get into history without the full context. So when you go into history and you start looking at the concept of blood libel, accusations that, Orthodox Jewish culture performed human sacrifice, you have to understand that they created a cult called the Black Sun that practiced a lot of Orthodox Jewish rites and customs, to the point where they had intermingled with that society so closely that they were able to put themselves in positions of power. And the religion's still there, it's still beautiful, the belief is still there, but there are people in power that they put themselves there to hurt people. So when you say, the Rothschild family controls the world, and you don't get into the history of saying, well, the Rothschilds sired a cadet branch that Adolf Hitler was born into, that was he started. And the Rothschilds themselves are Sumerian. The Sumerians they took women as slaves and used their bodies to create children, hybrids, So, these are partially human, partially alien families, ages. The monarchy in the UK. Queen Elizabeth II recently passed away, and Charles is a monster. William is wonderful. William is a good person, but Charles was just as involved with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell as Andrew, and he was the one who was the primary driving force behind the monarch indoctrination programming, the monarch program. And it's a social control program that's rooted in the same, the culture of the Sumerians. And it's evil. And he's evil. And that's why and that's the other thing. I posted something, but I took it down just because I shifted the tone of my site a little bit. Since we're talking about the political structure of things a little bit here, because Charles was publicly cited, and I've posted this on Reddit under my same name, Tapes from the Future. He was publicly cited at movie premieres where Ghislaine Maxwell was there with underage women. He was there exactly in the same context that Andrew was there in that apartment with that girl, Virginia Joffrey. He is just as culpable, just as liable, and it takes him out of running for the throne. Not only that, he murdered Diana. She had written a letter to a trusted confidant in the early 90s. It's been leaked several times to the news and dismissed multiple times, not as a hoax. Everyone said, well, she wrote the letter. But it was like, well, isn't it funny? She predicted the way of her death. She didn't predict it. It was a planned thing. She knew the exact plan. She described it in enough detail for that to serve as evidence in a trial for her murder. And that's another one of the big things. I mean, you have to understand that when you think of the concept of an alien invasion 5,000 years ago, that's so ingrained themselves in the culture of the world that they're in power unquestionably, you forget that they're people and they're vulnerable to mistakes. They make mistakes all the time. And getting photographed with human trafficker is a pretty big mistake. Letting your wife find out, or he didn't let her. She found out. She found out through another trusted source. But I mean, the point is, we put it out there. People put this stuff out there in news articles, in the public. It's all documented. It's all sourced. And that's why I've been talking big. But everything I've been saying, I'm going to put sources out there, historical sources with the full context.
That was a lot to process here.
I know.
The recent changes, because I have been wondering how that kind of change in a figurehead will affect the society. But it sounds like the worst case scenario happened, and we're going to be stuck maybe another 20 years with this guy.
No, see, that's the thing. People aren't talking about it because people say they dismiss it. I think that if enough people say, well, enough people see those two pieces of evidence, there's going to be enough of a public outcry for them to say, listen, we don't want this man as our king. Because the historical context of the invasion of the Sumerians aside, everything about the modern state of the world that we discussed previously is true. This is just additional historical context.
Maybe now's a good time to go into this alien invasion. From what you're saying, it sounds like that fear we have of them coming down and making hybrids, that already happened thousands of years ago.
Well, I mean, okay, with time travel, it's not exactly thousands of years ago because that's when they came down. But I mean, they pass these things back and forth because memory kind of exists outside of ourselves. And you've spoken with people who have had past lives, experiences recalling those, and it works the same way. And yeah, I mean, when you think about the universe being made of light, holomorphic universe, you can even physically move, just like data, to the past, present, or future. So I got off track. Your question, though, it was about the
Sumerians, about what you had been finding out. So kind of the details on how that transpired, or how.
Yes, right. So yes, the time travel, right. So, but that's the thing, like when you talk about the Nusa Kamasutra and you look at it and you read it, so many elements of it are prophetic. So is the New Testament. And they're prophetic in a way that is becoming easier to understand given the context of history and the modern world around us. I'll give you two examples. You know the star Wormwood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So thinking of language as bits and pieces, the word churn, it's woods, right? I'm sorry, a CERN. Let me see. Okay, so here, it's a perfect example. Chernobyl, what the word is, it is wormwood. It's a cognate. That's just, that is, it's technically, it's commonly translated as mugwort, but mugwort is wormwood. It's the same plant, or the same subspecies. So when you think of the star wormwood poisoning waters, that already happened.
Oh.
And I'll give you another example in the book of Revelation. The Nicolaitans. The Nicolaitans hold the doctrine of Balaam, and Balaam was the religion of the Sumerians. There is the religion of the Sumerians. And that's in Revelations 2:5. Because the word Baal means Lord, master, lordship. I don't know if you've ever played Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
Moloch Baal. That's like, the name is they put that in there intentionally because it's based off real history.
So are these predictions a result of time travel, or was it? Or were these? So I assume these were good forces trying to go back in time to counteract.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, because that's the thing. Once you realize anyone can time travel, then literally anyone can time travel. And just because these monsters were trading magic for the lives of these girls didn't mean that magic didn't already exist in the world and wasn't there for people to use. Because people were using magic before Egyptian society existed, just not openly, just not in the ways that were always obvious. And yeah, I mean, when time travel is possible, it can be a time machine, or it can just be walking from one room to another, like walking into history.
Yeah, I wonder what happens to the continuity of things. Like, let's say someone time travels and they kill you in the past. How does that affect the continuity of things?
There's a lot of different rules regarding quantum mechanics. We could discuss them if you'd like, because so that's a simple one. That's the grandfather paradox, right? You go back in time, you kill yourself or your own grandfather's or whatever, so you don't exist. Exactly. That's not possible. People think it's possible because they see that happen. Like, maybe they'll go back in past and they'll kill someone they think is themselves, their father, their grandfather. But what'll happen is either they hurt someone else, or it'll cause a time loop, because the universe's rules are pretty rigid when it comes to deviations from the grand, not design exactly, but determinism, because ultimately the universe is deterministic. That's the only way time travel is possible. And what that means is that everything's already kind of locked. All those interactions with the past are recorded in history, which is why you have plenty of historical sightings and documentations of time travel. And, because it's deterministic, it doesn't mean that we don't have free will. It just means that we don't see everything all at once. Just see a little bit ahead of us at a time.
I guess the rules of time traveling would kind of be like the chessboard. Like, your certain pieces can only make certain moves. You can't just like do whatever you want in the game of.
Okay, so it's a little bit more flexible than that, because it is also possible to create a divergence from a universe and create a bud universe, which would be, that's kind of how the multiverse is formed. It's through divergences, through different interactions. Usually multiversal interactions, because when things go off track in a timeline, it's because of future knowledge. And so even time loops are, in a way, they're like bud universes. They're these little parallel universes where you kind of see where get off track and get a chance to fix things. Because at the end of those, it kind of resets you to the point at which that death would have been prevented. People go through deja vu and time travel. I mean, deja vu literally means seeing the same thing twice. That's literally what it means.
Okay, so it seems like how do we know we wouldn't be just the product of someone else's universe? I guess it gets a bit like Rick and Morty there, where
5 billion versions of a teenage boy.
Yeah.
I understand exactly. No, and it's a big philosophical question, but the answer is very simple. You have a soulmate. There's one other person out there for you. I've heard people refer to them as your twin flame, soulmate, soul bond. souls are created in dyads. Like each individual soul has kind of two parts to it, a male and a female aspect, which is part of why that document, Masora, that's why that word is there. The home of Masora is really the soul. So really it's the song of the soul, the song of us. So many different potential positive translations, far and away from the negative ones, like the Rites of the Black Sun or Golden Dawn. Because that's the other thing. Golden Dawn is another deeply evil organization. And the Masons, they're the Masons. They are the Masons. And I'll give you an example of how evil they are, because golden is this masculine domination word associated with dawn, which is this feminine word. And so they consolidate that evil and they put that psychic resonance there, and they know exactly what it means. It's like, have you ever read Snow Crash?
No.
Snow Crash is a great book because it describes exactly the way this stuff works. It's like hacking the mind. It's like hacking the source code of the mind. Sometimes physically by, affecting the hippocampus or other parts of your physiology. But, the soul is magic. The mind is magic. Memory is magic when it comes down to it, because they're not really quantifiable by science as we know it.
What would the average person be capable of? Like in a lifespan of, if you were to try and learn yourself, what's kind of the limits we have?
There aren't any limits, and that's the thing. That's what those things have done. One of the greatest evils they've done is they've put limits on us. Because we truly are. I mean, you ever see Star Trek Q?
I've seen Star Trek. I'm
You're not familiar with Q.
I'm not familiar with Q.
Like, do you watch a lot of shows? Supernatural. Give me an idea. I want to find a good touchstone to compare, because I want to talk a bit about like the way this kind of works in the universe.
I've watched Rick and Morty. I watch anime.
Okay, so Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty. Okay, perfect. So, all right, with like the whole soulmate thing, right? And I know I go off on tangents. Could we just back up? That's what we're talking about, right?
Go ahead. Yeah, go on.
Okay. All right. Sorry if I change the topic midstream, because that one's really important, because the whole solipsism thing, making sure that you're not just one person, it gets really confusing. But knowing that, and the whole no limits thing, right? Okay. Yeah. So we were talking about, sorry. Took me a second to get caught back up. So no limits. I don't want to say like Rick and Morty, because yeah, it's like there's no limits there, but it would be like God. Anyone could be a god. It's just being a god doesn't mean domination. It means creativity. That's what it means. You can literally think things into existence, and you're doing it side by side with the person that you. That's the potential. That's the true potential of a soul.
Let's say manifestation or something like that. Would that be a product of education? Like you need to read and study certain things?
More like training a muscle. I mean, the heart's a muscle. It's really the way to learn that is through love. Because every time I've ever learned it, because I've forgotten it so many times in my life, because I've been subject to the Monarch program and to Torah and for so long fluoride. But every time I learned it, it was from the person that I love. They would always find a way to tell me how to bring that out within myself. And there are ways to learn it. So I'm going to give you and the audience a perfect tool for them, a test for them to practice. Actually, I'll give you a couple. All right. So find a song, a really, really good song, like Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush or Life on Mars by David Bowie. Actually, I would really recommend Life on Mars by David Bowie on repeat. That's the one. Okay. So Life on Mars, put it on repeat, and just listen. If you're in a state where marijuana is legal, that's fine. Maybe have some sugar, things that make you feel happy, put you in a good place. Even some alcohol. You don't want to numb yourself, though. You want to be open to the experience because it's a mental one. Mm-hmm. And so what you're going to do is, while you listen to that song, play it over and over and over again. in your head, you're going to think, and it's going to be like stream of conscious. You're going to let your mind wander. It's a meditation in ways. What you're really doing is you're using that as a mantra to open yourself up to a connection to the rest of the universe targeted at your soulmate. Because music, there's actually something I discovered. I don't know if you saw Loab, the digital demon, the AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something else. I have it in my notes downstairs, but there's basically this evil tone associated with the shape of a spiral in sacred geometry. It's associated with here. I've got the sacred geometry right here. It is called, and this is why spirals are such a common motif in the Sumerian, Egyptian, Anunnaki culture, and it's because they're a psychic resonance. Not a good psychic resonance, and I'm going to explain why and how.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I tend to see a lot of spirals and never-ending tunnels, like when I get into deeper states of meditation.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. So spirals, what they are, because like I say, there are, and spirals are representations of other things. And that's why I say this particular spiral, this particular mathematic equation results in a tone. So like when you speak, I'm going to do a little voice trick. I've done it before on my channel. You can speak in a voice like helium with magic. So you can say to your vocal cords, I want to sound like I'm speaking with helium, and your voice can go up to that point. Not just helium. You could say, I want to speak, I'm on hydrogen, and your voice goes up even higher. It works with anything. You can speak in the form of, you can speak the psychic resonance of a word. So I'm kind of afraid to go to some of those meanings because of the way that they've been changed. Yes, it's called the Wasta of Zalzal, and he was a sorcerer. History records him as a mathematician, and what that is, the Wasta, it is that psychic amplifier I was talking about. And what it is a spiral whose ratio equals the tone known as the Wasta of Zalzal. And I'll give you, here's the diagram of it.
Okay.
This is not the golden ratio. The golden ratio is something beautiful. What this is if you look up, can you look up the neutral third on, let me see. If you could play this sound, because it is a negative sound, but I want you to hear it because it has a very distinct negative. So neutral third on Wikipedia, there's a few samples of magic. That's what this is. That's what I'm describing. That's what we're listening to. That's a good example.
Oh no, I'm playing it. I got it on screen. Yeah, that's really dysphoric. It doesn't sound good.
It's very dissonant. And if you play it on repeat, you feel worse and worse and worse. And I'll tell you something very interesting. I've been using salt circles for meditation. I played this on a speaker on repeat. It made me feel awful. I stepped into the salt circle, and it was like stepping into a Faraday cage. The interference was gone.
How would you make a salt circle?
Just take salt, plain salt, non-iodinized salt, and pour it in a circle on the floor. Or you could, what I would suggest is you could like get like some tubing, fill it up with salt, and kind of like combine it almost like a hula hoop, so you don't have to like sweep up salt anytime you want to use it for meditation.
Okay, so what effect does salt have?
Salt is it's sort of a transmitter, psychic blocker. It's a medium. Salt, so much of our bodies are made up of salt. I mean, salt is just as critical as carbon to life. Mm-hmm. And so it has certain properties, magically speaking, but magic is just science by different definitions. Because when you think of things like synthesia, seeing words as colors, or being able to translate a mathematical drawing of a spiral into a sound, or the movements of planets into sound. I mean, that's understanding that you're repeating the same content, the same meaning, different formats over different mediums.
Okay, that makes sense. It's kind of a wiring that you can use to connect.
Yeah, it's the code. It's the base code of the universe. And when you think of Doctor Who, there's this in Doctor Who, there's something called Old High Gallifreyan, and what it is it's a lexicon, an index, really, of every single character, and its tonal qualities, its psychic resonances, its meanings, and that's the basis. I mean, really what it is, it's the basis of all language, and it compiles all language. Because we're all souls at their base have the same wiring. So the same symbols do the same things for all of us. Like a hexagon, for example, is another thing like salt that is a psychic clearing symbol. So if you look up a symbol of a plain black hexagon, you look at it, you're going to feel calm.
Interesting.
And yeah.
I've only recently stepped into the knowledge of sacred geometry. I've heard a few podcasts on it now, including a sort of well-known mathematician who is shocked by going back into the ancient texts and studying geometry, how much of a profound impact it has, even how we base our language.
That's exactly what I'm saying. But as you have distance of it from it as a historian, just researching a certain part of it. I've been researching all of it. I've been pulling everything in at this point, and just seeing the whole picture and seeing how they've used these different psychic manipulations, chemical manipulations to control life. It's astonishing. It's painful to just know that we've been harmed in that way.
So we covered a lot of different topics. If you had to pick something to tell us here in this last little bit, where do you think we should go from now?
Okay, so I'm going to leave that up to you, because I will be a bit more about answering questions. But one thing I do want to give you is something, and I don't know if you want to leave this in the final cut, up to you. But in terms of my research and everything, all the names, dates, everything, a lot of this stuff is in there. December 30th, 2022 is the date of revelation. I know it sounds like, wow, it's really coming up. No, I mean, there's a reason. The reason we kind of connected is you heard of there's people on 4chan, there's people on all these sites. People are waking up. People are starting to understand this, and people are starting to talk about it. To know that there's something coming soon. Understand that when we talk about revelation, it's just, and the UFO community knows what they want from disclosure, and it is going to be that. It's going to be disclosure of a lot of things.
Do you have any information on how this would go down? Is this sort of a
saying the world, Book of Revelation is going to take place? It's not the apocalypse. So Wormwood already happened in the 80s, right? A lot of these things have been happening. So the Book of Revelation is really an esoteric text that describes the events of the past. It goes back to the 3700 BC, but really the past 37 years more than anything. And those historical events line up. Most of them are in order, not all.
Is there, what are we, are we just talking about disclosure as the main information leak here?
So there's the part of the end of Revelation. So a happy ending, right? Pretty much. But a big element of it is testimony and speaking the truth. Excuse me. That's really what's been happening. It's not just coming from, people on conspiracy channels. It's the Me Too movement. It's BLM. It's January 6th, because honestly, every single person in the U.S. government at that level is evil. And I wouldn't have done that myself, but, it's not just the Democrats and it's not just the Republicans. They're working together in in private. They're buddies. They're friends. They trade photos. They always talk about how they work across the aisle, and people like Biden can get away with talking about, and people like Clinton can get away with doing, so many of these things to girls and women. And it's not just, I don't want to put it on Democrats, because Donald Trump too, the way he treats women is abhorrent, and he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they were pictured together so many times. I mean, it's not just recent. I'm talking historical precedents too, but I don't want to make it too political. I want to answer questions, because it's all kind of connected, but I think maybe we're more in the political direction. So,
do you have any idea on if this disclosure leak would be something of like a world government coming out, or more of like a anonymous kind of thing?
It's not going to be anonymous. I think people are going to know. I mean, the way that it's laid out in scripture, it's very clear about public testimony, about people. There are two people who give testimony. Their bodies lay in the street for 2 weeks in the forum.
We're talking about December 30th. What does December 31st look like?
I mean, a good day, hopefully. Because that's the thing. Revelation isn't meant to be, I mean, hopefully, I don't know. That's the thing. It's a big unknown. And that's why I've been researching. That's why I've been asking those questions. I don't know all the answers. I know enough of them to be pretty confident about that. But it's not framed as a bad thing in that book in the Bible. And knowing the truth of what the Song of the Soul was meant to be, I can't look at organized religion as evil, just the men and the women at the top who really, really take advantage. Like, there's a writer, Dan Ortberg, wrote for the media, Toast. I don't know if you ever heard this joke about Black Mirror. It's like, what if phones, but too much? Like, just, yeah, but that was just the name of one of the episodes. It was a really complicated name. But their family, they publicly revealed that their family had been involved in this abuse, and I mean, they were basically socially pilloried for it. Because when people challenge power, if we're not there to support each other, we lose.
Yeah. Any final words or anything like that before I'm
just gonna keep updating my site, Tapes from the Future, new articles. I'm gonna put a lot of that historical documentation out there for people. A lot of the cooler stuff like magic, tonal magic, in cool ways. I don't want people to learn evil magic off my website or evil psychic stuff, unless it's how to defend themselves from it. Because I want people to understand what the Torah is, how it's used, especially fluoride. Because number one thing, stop using fluoride. Yeah. Look into all the chemicals that are going into your body, even deodorant. You never know.
Yeah, I stopped using deodorant a long time ago. It's weird.
I mean, personal hygiene is still an issue, right? You always want to be careful, but you always want to understand what you're putting in there, especially knowing that there are people trying to put that stuff in.